In this video, we're going to write code to edit a specific trip. Okay, so to edit a trip, we need to click on the Edit button, which is located inside that trip. Okay. And then once we click that button, we can see all the details related to that trip. Then after that, we can amend any of those details and then click on the Edit button, or we can click on the Delete button and delete the trip. All right, so first of all, we're going to need to find a way to get the trip details once we click on that button. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is as following. When we click on that button and open the module, we need to know what opened this module. In other words, we need to know the button that the user has clicked on in order to open the module. Okay, so we're going to select the module and then find that button. There is something quite practical we can use here. It's called related target. It's a property of the event object, and it will tell us what button we clicked on to open the module. So once we find that button, then we're going to have access to the trip ID, which is located inside the button. If you remember, we placed it inside a data attribute, data trip ID. Okay, so now we've got the ID of the trip. So to get the details of the trip, we can just send an AJAX call to a PHP file and then run a query, and then we get the details of that trip. Now, on the PHP side, we will be able to retrieve all the details of that specific trip. But it's not going to communicate with the JavaScript side because we need to find a way to pass the data from PHP to JavaScript. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to encode data as a JSON format on the PHP side. So once we receive it on the JavaScript side, we can just pass that data and transform it to a JavaScript array and then use that array to fill the form fields. Okay. So that's what we're going to be doing in summary. So let's go ahead and write all this code. So we're going to write code for clicking on the Edit button inside a trip. So first of all, we're going to select the module. So you're going to select it using its ID. So the ID of the edit module is this one. So we want to write code once the module shows. Okay, so we're going to use the on method. So the event is show.bs.module. Okay, and then we're going to have the second parameter as a function, and it's going to have a parameter event that we will use later. Okay, so first of all, we're going to remove any errors, okay, that we would have in the error div. So we're going to access the error div and just remove any errors from there. So the error div has got an ID, edit trip message. Okay, so we emptied that message now. All right, now we're going to look for the button which opened this module. So to do that, we're going to use the event object. Okay, as I said earlier, there's a property called related target. So this related target will refer to the button that we click to open that module. Okay, so let's store this inside a variable. I'm going to call it invoker. just add a comment there. All right, so now we know that inside this button, we've got a data attribute with the ID of our trip. Now let's send the AJAX call to a file which will get the details of that trip, okay? So let's copy AJAX call from somewhere else. Okay, so the URL here is going to be the name of the file. So we're going to create a new file for this. So I'm going to call it get trip details.php. Okay. Let's open it. Okay, and let's go back to our JavaScript file. Just going to place it next to it. So the name of the file is get trip details. Okay, let's add the method. I'm going to use the post method. And the data to send here is going to be the ID of the trip. So now the ID of the trip is inside the button invoker. Okay. So we're going to call the elements we would like to send trip ID, and that's the name that's going to be processed by this file. Okay. So we're going to call it trip ID, and the value is going to be invoker dot, and now we're going to access the data attributes of the button. So data attribute is called data trip ID. Okay, so to access this data, we will need to use the data method and place inside this method trip ID. All right, so now we've got our data. Right, so now if the AJAX call is successful, so for now, all we're going to do is print the return data in the console, just to see what we've got, okay? If there is any error, then we're going to go to the edit trip message and say we've got an error. So let's save. Now let's go to the PHP file. So first of all, let's start a session and connect, as we did in the other files. Okay, and now we are ready to create a query. So the query is going to select the trip using its ID. So the syntax is going to be select records from our table car share trips, and the condition is that the trip ID matches this one, which was sent using the post method. So that's the key, okay, inside the post array. Okay, so that's our query. So now let's run the query and store the results inside a result variable. Now let's check if the query has been successful. So if, okay, let's go for the opposite. So if it's not successful, then we're going to echo something like error. Okay, otherwise, we're going to define a variable row where we're going to store the single line that we've got inside the result object. Okay, so you're going to use the fetch array function. Okay, and we can add MySQLi associative to have an associative array. All right. Now we're going to encode this array in a JSON format and then echo it to be sent to the JavaScript file. So we're going to echo the array, but encoded as JSON. So to do that, we're going to use JSON encode. So this is a function that will encode our array to JSON. Okay, so let's save. Let's go back to the Ajax call. And let's see what we get. So before we move on, let's just check what the invoker looks like. So I'm just gonna comment the Ajax code for now and just alert the invoker to make sure we're doing the right thing. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so we've got here an object HTML button element. Okay, so if we print this in the console, what do we get? Okay, so we can see here the HTML code of the button. So basically, this is what event.related_target will give us. So in order for us to select the button itself, we will need to select this. So you're going to add a $, like that. Okay. And now we will be able to actually use the button and go inside the button and get the data attributes from the button. Okay. So now let's uncomment the Ajax call. Let's save and try our code. So let's open the console again. Okay, so this is what we get. So we can see the JSON format that has been returned to us from the PHP file. So we'll need to use this data to fill the edit form. But before we do that, we'll need to use a format that we can manipulate using JavaScript. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to transform this format to an array because we can easily manipulate arrays. So to do this, we're going to use a method of JSON, or the JSON object, which is called parse. Okay, so this method is going to take as a parameter our return data, which is that one. And let's store the results inside a variable I'm going to call trip. So let's define this variable outside the function, as I'm going to use it later on. Okay, so let's define it there. Okay, now let's print this in the console. Okay, so this is what we get. So now we can see that we've got an associative array. Okay, it says objects here, but an array is an object anyway. So we can see all the details of our trip right there. So you're going to use these details to fill the form. Okay, so to do this, we're going to create a function. Let's call it format module. So this function is going to fill the form with the trip details. Now, before we do this, actually, we will need to check if we've got anything returned. Okay, and then we're going to check if the return data is error. And then we can go ahead and do this. Okay, so let's check first if we've got anything returned. In that case, we're going to check if the return data is error. If that's the case, we're going to echo an error message, or just show the error message inside the edit trip message. Else, we're going to pass the JSON format or the JSON data and use it to format the module. So if we've got an error, we're just going to show an error there. Okay, so now we will need to define this function. And we'll do that in the next video.